The Compliance Life details the journey to and in the role of a Chief Compliance Officer. How does one come to sit in the CCO chair? What are some of the skills a CCO needs to successfully navigate the compliance waters in any company? What are some of the top challenges CCOs have faced, and how did they meet them? These questions and many others will be explored in this new podcast series. The Compliance Life is hosted by Tom Fox, and each month he'll present the story of one CCO through 4 episodes. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
For the month of March on The Compliance Life, I visit with Rob Chesnut. Rob was most recently the Chief Compliance Officer at Airbnb. Rob has had a long and distinguished legal career, starting out with the U.S. Attorney's Office, then moving across the country to join eBay in the 1990s. He worked in Silicon Valley for the next 20 years or so. In 2016, he moved to Airbnb as their general counsel, and later moved to take on the role of the Chief Ethics Officer. He also wrote the best-selling book, Intentional Integrity. It's a really fascinating podcast series. Rob has a unique journey, as do all Chief Compliance Officers. I know you will enjoy this series, and more importantly, you will learn a lot about being an in-house lawyer, a Chief Compliance Officer, and a Chief Ethics Officer. Plan to join us over the month of March for The Compliance Life. These podcasts post each Tuesday at 2 p.m. In part 1 of this special 4-part podcast series with Rob Chesnut, we take a look at his formative years, how the Honor Code at the University of Virginia influenced his thoughts around ethics going forward, moving to the U.S. Attorney's Office out of law school, and some of the top and really important cases he handled in the U.S. Attorney's Office. I know you'll enjoy it. Thanks for listening. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox, and welcome to another episode of The Compliance Life. And today you are in for a real treat, as am I, because we're going to visit this month with Rob Chesnut. Rob is the most recently retired Chief Compliance Officer from Airbnb, but his career is really much more extensive than that, and I think you're in for a real treat. So, Rob, first of all, thank you so much for taking the time to visit with me on this.
Well, Tom, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Rob, in this episode, we wanted to go a little bit into your academic background, where you went to college and law school, and how any of those areas that you either studied, read about, or even were brought up might have informed you moving into compliance at a later date. So could you maybe start with that for us?
Sure. I was a government major at the University of Virginia, and I went to Harvard Law School. The University of Virginia I think, had a real impact on me in that they're famous for having an honor code about lying. And if you are caught lying, you're expelled from the school. And it's a student-run honor organization. And so I think I grew up with a strong sense of the importance of rules. And that's something that I carried with me when I got out of law school and ended up at the U.S. Justice Department for the first, 14 years of my career.
So I've heard a lot of people over the years talk about UVA's honor code and the impact that it had on them. You feel like that sort of honor code still exists at UVA, or is it ended somewhere after perhaps our generation went through?
Well, the honor code still exists at UVA, and but look, I think it evolves too. It's not perfect, and there's certainly aspects of it I think that are constantly under review. But what I think is more important than the details of exactly how it works or what its flaws might be is the basic principle that I think it instills in students. Look, I think any college will tell you that lying, cheating, and stealing is bad. But something that the University of Virginia, I think, does well is they drive the importance of integrity throughout the culture of the school. It's openly talked about. And I think the fact that it's part of the conversation means that people think about it there, and it does have an impact on students' lives.
I really like the way you set that up, where you said it's evolving, and then near the end you said it's an ongoing conversation. I once heard an interview with Wei Chen about the original formation of the evaluation of corporate compliance programs that got released in February of 2017. And she said her goal was really to have a conversation and to get compliance practitioners to start thinking and talking about these issues. And so it really sounds like that by having that ongoing dialogue, that evolution, it's allowed you to be a part of that discussion, but it's allowed a generation, maybe even 2 or 3 of UVA students to also be a part of that discussion.
Well, yeah, the UVA, the code of the University of Virginia dates back to the beginning of the school and Thomas Jefferson's founding of it. So it's something that's gone on for a couple of centuries now, and I think that's impactful. Again, this impacts me in the way I think about things at companies as well. Like every company, every large company, every public company's got a code of conduct, and it talks about integrity. The problem is that for many companies, this code of conduct is buried a couple of links deep in the corporate intranet, and nobody talks about it, and nobody knows what it means. Look, WeWork. I was looking the other day at WeWork's code of ethics, and their code of ethics talks about it has the word integrity in the first 2 lines, but the company ended up falling apart. In part due to a lack of integrity in the way that they operated. So it's not enough to have the words. You need to have the conversation, the dialogue to go with it to keep it top of mind.
So I was wondering if you could tell us a little about your initial professional experience after you graduated from law school and what led you to the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Well, I think rules have been sort of a theme throughout my career, right? And I got out of law school. I clerked for a judge, and when I clerked for a judge in Northern Virginia, I saw prosecutors in court all the time, every day. And look, I'm the type that likes to learn through doing instead of watching. And I know that if I went to a law firm, there's a lot of watching partners do the work. And I love the fact that the Justice Department would take young people, and give them a file and say, go do this. So, I ended up in the Justice Department Honors Program and did civil constitutional defense work for a while until I could get myself back to Northern Virginia for a position as a federal prosecutor. And I ended up staying in the U.S. Attorney's Office there for about 10 years. I ended up running the major crimes unit. And, I was there at a very interesting time. It's a fascinating jurisdiction. I think it's probably the one of the most sought after prosecution offices in the country because it has the CIA in its jurisdiction and a lot of federal buildings. So they end up with a lot of interesting cases that most offices don't see. I ended up handling a number of espionage cases, including a guy by the name of Aldrich Ames, who was a CIA employee who spied for the Russians. And I ended up, being able to do cases like that because of, the location of the office. But again, it goes back to drilling further into me the importance of, having rules that are grounded in integrity and the consequences of what happens when you don't live that way.
So let me go back to your clerkship for a moment and ask you a couple of questions about that. Could you tell us the name of the federal judge you clerked for?
Sure. Judge Richard L. Williams. Judge Williams was a Virginia lawyer and a heck of a trial lawyer. And he came out of a law firm by the name of McGuire Woods. It's still a big force today, and was my mentor as a young lawyer.
And in that role, I clerked for a state trial judge, so I have some familiarity with at least the process, and you get to see sort of the best of the best and some examples that maybe less than best. And did that help inform your start of your legal career?
Sure. You learn as much from the lawyers that aren't very good as you do from the lawyers that are great. The judge, we used to, to take breaks from court, and the judge would go back to the chambers with us. And he'd, in his very colorful style, would tell us exactly what he thought of what the lawyers were doing and what the mistake was. And the judge would rant about, why the lawyer asked one too many questions and ended up, just killing him. So, the judge was really my teacher in how to be a trial lawyer. And, again, that has a big impact on me, to this day.
You mentioned the Aldridge Ames case. I was wondering if you might talk to us about two or three of the really memorable cases that you handled while you were at the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Well, the Aldridge Ames case was obviously right there. I mean, it was a national, international case, front pages of all newspapers, and back then we had magazines like Time and Newsweek, and I remember it was on the cover, which certainly put a lot of pressure on me as a young lawyer, going to court every day with the packed courthouse and the cameras and the like. Ames and his wife both ended up pleading guilty to espionage, and that was handling that case and working with the FBI and the folks at the CIA is something I'll never forget. I handled a number of cases involving drug organizations. And I think those impacted me in a different way. I ended up prosecuting a lot of young people who, frankly, didn't have the opportunities that I had in life. And these are young kids who were going to jail for 10, 20 years without parole. I would do everything I could to help work with them to get them to cooperate so that the sentence could be reduced. I think that experience built some empathy, frankly, in me, and it's a very powerful experience, and something that, frankly, it led me to leave the U.S. Attorney's Office ultimately because I wanted to be a positive force in the world. You need prosecutors; they're important, but I wanted to feel like I was going to work every day, creating opportunities for people and creating, something that could help bring the world closer together. And as a prosecutor, you are unfortunately in a very negative role, in that you're sort of presiding over, lives that have gone in the wrong direction. So I learned a lot, but they were cases that were sad in a lot of ways and led me, I think, to look for something more.
Rob, could you tell us a little bit about the process that a U.S. attorney utilizes in terms of not getting a case ready for trial, but how do you work with the FBI? Does someone bring information to you? Do they bring a fully formed case to you and then you do the prosecutor thing? Or could you explain a little bit how that works for our audience?
Sure. I would get a call from an FBI agent. In the case of the Aldridge Ames case, it would be the head of the Washington field office, and they'd set up. They'd say, "I'd like to come by and talk to you about a new case," and they would come in and they would basically present the case to me. And sometimes the cases are fully formed. Sometimes in fact the arrest has already been made. Someone's robbed a bank and they arrested them in the getaway car, with the exploding dye pack. In other cases, it would come to me half formed, and they would, often realize that it was half formed, and we would then talk about what we could do to build the case. And so in some cases, I'm immediately working from an arrest, and the case is moving, and in other cases, it might be a year or two of investigation where you're working with the FBI and you're advising them on what type of evidence might be needed to meet the legal requirements and the legality of different potential tactics to get that evidence.
Did you ever have any cases where you worked together with Maine Justice? And if so, could you tell us a little bit about that process from an AUSA's perspective?
Yeah, I worked with Maine Justice a lot with the espionage cases, cases involving national security and classified, highly classified, code word type information would require, work with Maine Justice. And I didn't look at it as a requirement. I looked at it as, a partnership because I needed help. I didn't know it all. And I was lucky enough. There were a couple of lawyers there, a guy by the name of John Martin and another one by the name of John Dion, who were, legendary, really, I think, in that they had been working in the national security field for decades and had seen a number of these cases. And so for me, it was a partnership and using their expertise to help me get through the complexities of national security cases. And of course, there's always, the working with the higher ups at Maine Justice on, when you end up with an issue that can be a little bit politically sensitive and you're working with folks that are political appointees. You get some of that, but look, for the most part, as a federal prosecutor, the cases don't involve main justice cooperation. They're cases that are handled by folks in the field on a routine basis every day.
Well, Rob, unfortunately, we're near the end of our time for this episode, but I hope our listeners will join us for our next episode where we take a look at your move to the corporate world. I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thanks, Tom.
Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. Thank you again for listening to this episode of The Compliance Life. I hope you'll join me again next week where I take up another episode with Scott Sullivan in The Compliance Life. The Compliance Life is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network. If you would like to be featured on The Compliance Life, please give me an email at tfox@tfoxlaw.com. Also, if you like this series, please give us a rating on iTunes. Any review and rating would definitely help get the word out about the latest addition to the Compliance Podcast Network. Thanks again.